Hello everyone, this is TheNelston. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm here to show you some cheap non-mythic builds that anybody can use to clear the Nameless Anomaly on any class. So basically, I'm going to be presenting all of you with one build per class, and each of these are going to be the most optimal builds that I could think of for that specific role. These are not the only builds that you can use, but these are pretty cheap, simple, and most importantly, they are very effective. Without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the builds that you can use to easily clear the hardest raid in Wynncraft 2.0, the Nameless Anomaly. To start off, we have the first and my personal favorite class, the Archer, and for that I've prepared a tier stack bolt slinger sharpshooter hybrid build that builds up focus using triple shots homing and deals an incredible amount of damage. So if we look at the stats right now, you'll see that you have a very commendable amount of effective HP, especially for a class like Archer. And on top of that, you also have very good DPS. So you're dealing about 57.5k average DPS pre-buffs, by the way. The lifesteal, however, is a little bit on the lower side, so you won't necessarily be outputting as much sustain as you might otherwise want to be. But I mean, this is still a very decent amount to be healing every 3 seconds, in my opinion. And of course, this takes advantage of a bunch of different multipliers. First off, we have the movement speed multiplier from Frenzy. So if you deal 100 hits, your walk speed is 218%, and that's up from a base of 58%. And then your focus, if you charge it all the way up to 7, makes it so that you will now be dealing an astounding 178,000 average DPS with a perfect roll on everything. Of course, realistically, you'll probably be dealing a little bit less than that, but as soon as we hop into my housing, you'll see just how powerful it still can be. So what makes this possible? Well, let's talk about the ability tree. First off, we have everything that is spec'd into Bolt Slinger available here. So basically, we just went for everything down this path in order to get Guardian Angels, which is a decent amount of DPS. It's not the most in the world. 11.5k is, nothing to write home about, but it is still nice to have. In addition to that, we also have things like Leap, which are incredibly important for dodging the charge attacks of the TNA boss, and so it's very vital that you have these active all the time. Apart from that, of course, we have the Sharpshooter tree, which provides so many useful things, such as most notably the Focus, but of course you also get other things such as Precise Shots, Homing Shots, and yeah, I mean that's pretty much it actually. Here we are in my housing, and I'm about to show you how to use the single most difficult build ever conceived in the game. In case you couldn't tell, yes, I am literally just holding down right click. If you want to be sweaty, you can even right click like manually to fire slightly faster. So yeah, I mean that's the build. Let's take it into a raid. Moving on to our next class, we'll be talking about the Shaman. And for the Shaman, I've prepared for all of you a hybrid Acolyte, Ritualist, Healer, and Tank hybrid. And essentially the idea behind this is that if your team doesn't have a warrior to draw aggro, or if your warrior isn't really tanky enough to survive constantly being attacked by the boss, this is where you step in as both a secondary tank and additionally as a support healer. So if we look at the stats, you'll notice that you have about 81.5k effective HP, and if you put on Mask of the Fanatic, of course that goes up 2 times. Moving on to the healing, you'll notice that the aura is going to cost about 17 mana, which means without buffs, you're roughly going to be able to cast about like 4 to 5-ish auras every 5 seconds, or roughly 1 aura per second, which is more than enough to sustain, because if you look at the heal amount, the rebound total heal, in other words, how much total healing you get after the aura goes out and comes back, is 21,000 health. So I would say it's plenty. Moving on to the ability tree, it is, as I mentioned before, a mix between the Ritualist, mainly for the Mask of the Fanatic, which makes you tankier, and Acolyte, which is primarily going to be for the healing. And of course, we also have some extra kind of cross-pathing into Summoner, so that you can get double totem for even more effective healing. Moving on, we're going to go into my housing to show you how to use this build first, and then we'll hop into a raid and I'll demonstrate how to use it there. So basically what you do is quite simple. You throw down 2 totems, you charge up your blood pool, you switch over to Mask of the Fanatic if you're tanking, and if you're just using cheaper auras, you can use Mask of the Lunatic. But basically, once your blood pool is charged up, you just press aura, and it'll heal you typically faster than the blood pool will drain your health. And so you should be fine, in terms of sustainability. One slight issue will be that if you are taking damage from the boss itself, you may see yourself potentially losing more health than you heal back. But, in order to counter that, we have an ability called Blood Right, which will make it so that if you do take damage, you can actually recover some of your blood pool just by being within range of a totem. And so this makes it so that your health drain isn't nearly as severe, since you can just kind of mitigate it. Okay, let's move on to a raid. The next class I'm going to talk about is the Warrior, and for this I've prepared for you all an aggro bait paladin build. The idea behind this is essentially you draw the aggro of the boss and all the minions, and this way your DPSs can go to town on the boss and, finish the raid really quickly. So as a result, the damage here is not going to be very good, but this is easily probably the single most important build to bring to the TNA raid, just because of the fact that if you can draw aggro properly, you basically have a free completion. So let's talk about the build components here. In essence, you have a bunch of items that not only give you raw health, but also give you a massive amount of health regen and health regen percentage. And as a result, you can see that you have about 163k pre-buff effective HP, and you heal around 46,000 of that every, I think it's 3 to 5 seconds. So yeah, you have no problems staying alive, especially if you also get the raid buffs, such as I think it's Hollowed or something that gives you plus 80% extra HPR, which is gonna make your survivability even more insane. If we look at your health with War Scream, it goes up to about 203.6k, and then with Mantle active, which is, the 5 shields, you get about 679k. And of course that only lasts for 5 hits, but it is still quite good. Moving on to the ability tree, honestly, this is really straightforward. It's just speccing all the way down into Paladin, and these upgrades are extremely important because they not only buff your EHP, but they also provide a ton of very important utilities, such as rejuvenating skin, which is extremely important for healing and even more sustain. And then you have Second Chance, which I would argue is one of the most important abilities in this entire tree, overall Paladin tree, and then you cross path into Fallen in order to use Ragnaroker. Then of course the other skill points are just kind of distributed randomly. Radiance is also extremely important to use because this will buff your allies' positive IDs by 20% for about 5 seconds every 15 seconds. And this will just make your DPSs do even more damage, and most importantly, make it so that you can tank even more damage. Here we are in my housing to demonstrate how the build works. I really hope it's obvious how to tank damage, given that it's not that hard of a job, but regardless, I think it may be a good idea to talk about how things work. So first off, you have two important spells. You have your War Scream, which is not only going to make it so that you have your shields active, but it also draws the aggro of the boss onto you. And then you have Radiance, which if you watch my health, you'll see that it actually goes up slightly, and that's because Radiance will buff all of your positive IDs for about 5 seconds. And it's important to note that the aggro of War Scream will only last about 5 seconds, so you need to be using your War Scream once every 4 seconds or so just to be safe. Okay, let's hop into a raid and I'll demonstrate how to use the build there. The next class that we're going to talk about is the Mage. And for that, I've prepared a riftwalker lightbender hybrid build that relies on stacking Winded on your enemies and then using the ophanim orb damage to burst them down very quickly. So if we take a look at the build here, it has very decent EHP, and the damage per melee from your ophanim orbs is quite good. And actually, if you drag up the Winded to the maximum of 15, with the 5 ophanim orbs that you're doing roughly about 87.6k damage per melee. And of course, if you use Ice Snake for, extra damage, you'll get even more from that. And then your Lightweaver orb damage, which you get from healing yourself, adds even more additional DPS. So overall, it is a very solid build. And let's take a look at the ability tree to kind of dissect things even further. So if we look on the left side, you'll notice that we basically have everything that gives us maximum Winded. So we can go up to 15 using this specific kind of layout. And then the rest of the skill points we sync into the Lightbender tree. And this is just to make sure that we have all of the requisite upgrades to make the ophanim orbs as good as possible. Unfortunately, we can't take things such as better Lightweaver, which would increase our DPS even more, but that's mainly because we just don't have enough ability points, and this is actually the most optimal combination for dealing the maximum damage at max Winded with the most amount of possible orbs. With all that being said, let's hop into my housing and demonstrate the build before we take it into a proper raid. So here's how this build essentially works. First, you want to cast your Meteor, which will give you your 5 ophanim orbs, and then you kind of just want to start meleeing. You'll notice over time, as your orbs attack, they'll actually turn red. So first they'll turn yellow, which means, they're a little low on health, and then they'll turn red, which means that they are completely out of, health. And you want to make sure to heal them so that you can keep them sustained without having to recast Meteor, since Heal, as you can see, is a 27 cost spell, whereas Meteor is a 51 cost spell. So ideally, you want to try to keep your ophanim orbs alive for as long as possible, because it means that you don't have to waste nearly as much mana as you otherwise would have to. And you can see that the mana sustain is actually quite nice for this build, thanks to the fact that you have a ton of natural mana regen, in addition to your mana steal, which keeps your mana bar pretty much topped up all the time. So yeah, if you look at the damage, it's pretty good, I would say, for such a self-sustaining build. I was actually able to get to about 100k earlier. I don't remember if that was because I just got really lucky with crits. You can see actually I just got about 92k here. So yeah, it's overall a very solid build. If you mix in some Ice Snakes, as I'm currently doing, you can get even more damage. And yeah, so look at that, I got up to 99k, and I'm sure we could break 100k if I kept doing this for long enough, but really I don't feel like doing that. So yeah, we're just gonna leave the demonstration at this and hop into an actual raid. And finally, we have the last class, and unfortunately, what I would argue to be the worst one in 2.0, and that is, of course, the Assassin. So you might notice that this build is very similar, in fact, identical to a build that I showcased earlier, and that is, of course, true. The reason for that is because tier stack Assassin is honestly just the best playstyle you're going to get in 2.0 as of the recording of this video. Non-mythic options for spell daggers have been nerfed pretty heavily. For example, black is no longer as good as it was in 1.20 due to some changes to mana regen and mana steal. And other options such as rewind would be great, except the archetype that you would want to use it with, that being the acrobat, isn't really all that good. So unfortunately, I would say overall tier stack Assassin is still the way to go if you really must get raid completions on your Assassin, or you're a diehard Assassin fan and you want to stick with it until the bitter end. So anyways, let's talk about the stats here. You have about 49,000 effective HP, an average DPS of around 37.5k, and of course your sustain is, well, let's not talk about it. Your exploding is 80%, which can actually be increased with a raid buff to make Scarlet Veil extremely powerful, since you also get the Fission ID with it. And then apart from that, of course, this is not the only damage you're gonna get. You can also buff it with things such as Marked. You know, you'll do some pretty nice damage. And then with Delirious Gas, you'll do, yeah, 69k. Nice. So if we look at the ability tree, we'll have a bunch of abilities that buff your survivability, such as Mirror Image, and then some other stuff that'll also buff your damage, such as Marked, and, well, literally all of the buffs that you'll find in the Shadester tree. Because I never actually bothered to do a journey further, or, you know, even a journey beyond for my Assassin, because of the brutal nerfs in 2.0, I'm not even going to bother taking this into a raid. I'm sure you guys can figure out how it'd play out. I mean, it's literally just use Vanish and left click on the enemies until they die. But just for the sake of showcasing, I will discuss how to play it here in my housing. As I mentioned, you go into Vanish, and then you throw down a smoke bomb, and you just start clicking on the mob. And yeah, I mean, it does a decent amount of damage, I guess. It's not terrible. You also have great EHP, so you're not going to be dying too bad. But in terms of damage-wise, I mean, I don't know, man. Assassin has definitely seen better days. Again, if you want to, you could also play Spell Assassin with Acrobat. Personally, I just don't believe it's worth it, because Acrobat has so much more complexity to it, and you're only dealing like an extra 10 or 20,000 damage with non-mythic spell daggers. So I just don't think it's worth it. I don't see the point in it. You may as well just go tier stack and hope your team can carry you through the raid. I'm going to be brutally honest. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, or join my Discord. The link is in the pinned comment and in the description. And yeah, I really hope this video helped you guys succeed in more TNA runs. With that all being said, if you liked the video, make sure to leave a like. If you hated it, please leave a dislike. It helps with engagement anyways. Drop a subscription if you want to see more videos like this in the future. And otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day. And as always, I'll see you all in the next video.